Welcome back to Detections Podcast with your hosts, Exiled, Atreides, and
Understudy 77.
We got some pretty cool stuff to talk about today because we're getting into what drives us both and we're passionate about, the Security Operations Center.
I agree. However, there's a note, because I saw something a couple days ago, and I really want to talk about this because I think it's really important. And I'm going to mostly paraphrase, but Rob Fuller, Mubix, for anybody who's unfamiliar, he's the guy one of the guys who founded Nova Hackers. Very smart, very bright guy. But he made a post on Twitter that I think spoke to me a lot, and this is important with us doing a podcast to talk about. He basically said, I want to make something very clear to InfoSec. Just because you're not deeply technical, I'm a fucking manager. A pen tester, a red team, or forensics expert, RE whiz, doesn't mean you can't teach people. Everybody's life experiences are different. And basically, he's encouraging people to share their experiences and what they do and so on and so forth. This is a really great thing. And I think it's something that we really should talk about too, as, you know, we do a podcast. Well, who the fuck are we? You can do a podcast too.
Absolutely. I mean, like, when we talked at DerbyCon about this, like, you've been in the industry double digits of years, and I'm like, I've only been 5 years. Like, I am just now getting established, but here we are. Yeah,
there's literally no barrier other than that podcasts are actually kind of expensive. We have a Patreon, by the way. But I mean, Twitch, Discord, YouTube, it doesn't matter. Like, yeah, you have something to share. And I say this to the guys that I work with all the time, like every single one of them, including the newest guy who has no experience. Like, he'll say in a meeting, like, take me with a grain of salt. I don't really know, like, what I'm talking about. I'm like, no, don't say that. Like, you have a unique experience that is all your own, meaning you got hired. Like, you got hired to provide value. Like, I want to hear your unique experience from the intern up, and everybody has that experience. So, like, if we can convince even one person to, like, share knowledge in some public way, like, that would be awesome to me. Like, because you can all do it. We're nobodies. Like, we're all nobodies at the end of the day, but, like, we're no more special than anybody else. And if we can do it, like, any of you can do it.
Well, we're not complete nobodies. Like, you have a kid and I have a cat, so we're somebody to someone.
We are somebody to someone. And my kid is young enough that I'm like a superhero, which is awesome. But eventually, like, I also understand that she's going to hate me. And the cat, like, just probably hates you every other day because it's a cat. But not
until
on a
it's
schedule.
Food time. And then I'm the favorite person in the world.
Oh, yeah. And not on a schedule. Never on a schedule.
But yeah, anyway. But I mean, like, the whole, like, us being nobodies means, like, we're not, like, literal rock stars. We're not Hollywood actors. We're just people out here doing our normal job, sharing our experience. But that doesn't mean that we're not, like, this nobody in the negative sense, that what is shared is valuable to someone.
Yeah. And if we're wrong, like, call us out on it. Like, who the hell are we? Like, honestly, it's one of those things. I like sharing. I like teaching. I like broadcasting. I did it for many years outside of InfoSec. I really enjoy doing this stuff, but, like, it doesn't make me special. Like, I'm just a guy who likes to talk into a microphone.
And I'm an extrovert. I just need to talk. Like, I really don't care if people listen or not. I just need to talk.
Right? So, like, you can do this too. And everybody can do this. Share. Go to a local meetup. Submit to a conference. It doesn't matter. You can all do this.
Speaking of which,
just press record and talk.
Yeah, I was just going to say, speaking of which, submitting to conferences, someone who's been in it 5 years, like, I had some accepted.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yay.
So it's cool, but I'm also at the same time like, oh crap, this is the thing I want to do. Now, what happens if I suck at it?
You'll be fine. You're luckier than me. I've been turned down by pretty much everybody so far this year.
Well, but I mean, I'm just saying that to goes to show, like, I'm still this quote unquote nobody. 5 years really has that long of time to be in the industry. But there are people out there who will bring you in and give you a chance to do it.
Let's dissect that for a minute. That statement, because I don't like it. Time is irrelevant to knowledge. Completely and totally. Like, I have been a manager long enough at this point to have interviewed people with like 12 to 15 years of experience who know nothing, and to interview people with 6 months of study at home who know more than the guy who had 15 years or girl. Time means nothing in the pursuit of knowledge. Just want to throw that out there.
That's a very valid point. See, look, he proved me wrong on the air. Totally accepted it.
I mean, it happens, right? Like, we're allowed to. But anyway, so tell me about it. Where are you talking? What are you talking about?
So, the Diana Initiative, pretty cool nonprofit. They work specifically, mainly in providing support for women and non-binary gender people in the InfoSec industry with resources and things like that to help them through. For their 12-hour virtual conference that they're doing on Twitch that Dead Pixel Sec is helping to support. And this place called DakotaCon out in Madison, South Dakota, decided to take actually both of my pitches for ideas.
Nice. Are you willing to share what those pitches are yet?
Yes, I'm totally fine. So one of them actually is born from DerbyCon itself, right? So when we talked, I shared a little bit about how my experience on the West Coast with the community was very negative,
and yet you still keep saying West Coast, Best Coast.
very exclusive. Like, I wasn't a hacker. I wasn't a pen tester. I wasn't interested in figuring out how to exploit things. I just wanted to do good at my job at defense and detection. So there wasn't much of an acceptance there at the beginning 5 years ago. And then at DerbyCon, completely different experience with the people I encountered. A lot more willing just to talk. Like with you, had some validation of some ideas that I had that I developed in my own silo. So one of the talks is actually around this whole external, internal, negative and positive imagery. This idea that the quote unquote hackers or the security professionals in the news have this negative image, faceless black hoodie wearers, these criminals, they're out to steal data, destroy computers, and then the things we tell ourselves internally, like depression, imposter syndrome, self-doubt, and then contrasting that with like the nonprofit work that people in the hacker community and the security professional community do, the things they give back to the communities, people like Rob Fuller and Blind Hacker that do personal one-on-one mentoring, give back to local schools and individual people. And then actually a thing that has me really excited about it is I have a friend who is a licensed counselor who's going to help me with the internal positive aspects and provide things that individuals can do to help with combating imposter syndrome, self-doubt, and things like that.
So what's the other one?
The second one is something that I've been playing around with both professionally and personally, SOC, right? So if you think about SOC here in our study, the core of everything that comes back to all the work that's done that I think is the investigation, right?
Spoilers.
Yeah. All the tuning, all the false positive, all the reports are based around the investigation of these events. Now, for me, I didn't receive any training and no one told me how to do the investigation. I just had to figure it out on my own. So I see this as a gap of how can we help teach some of these, or at least relay some of the knowledge that we've gained about the mentality, a sort of like general process that one could follow to learn how to do an investigation as their knowledge and experience grows in the industry. And that's what I'm going with the second one.
I hope they put you back to back. As someone who has done that, I can tell you it's introvert or extrovert. It's exhausting because you're like just completely switching topics. The upside is if you run over in one talk, you only have yourself to be upset at. I actually did say that when we got the 5-minute warning on stage during my first talk. I was like, yeah, it doesn't matter. I'm the next speaker, so like I'm not mad. And then they still gave me the warning anyway.
I will remember that. I look forward to the challenge if it does happen, because this is as a new speaker, this is the first time I'm actually getting up on stage inside the community, even though I've done public speaking before.
I feel like as we go into my conference talk, or my conference news, that I'm going to drop a lot of Doctor Who references, and I've already dropped at least one, because this episode's a bit timey-wimey. But we're back in the present now, even though like it's timey-wimey. And somebody will understand that later on in a couple weeks. That'll make more sense. But like ShmooCon for me is next week. And I'm really, really super excited. Ray Redacted is doing a party for mental health hackers. Donate, you go to this party, play board games, have beverages. That's going to be super cool. And just ShmooCon in general, like every year, like I just enjoy that show so much. Like I have such a good time while I'm there. It was really like my first, all right, I take that back. DEF CON was like the first security conference I ever went to, but like, I don't really like DEF CON that much. It was like my first, like, oh, I'm kind of part of the community and I know a couple people that wasn't a B-sides, like small like a B-sides. It was a little bigger, a little bit more major. And like, it just to me, like it's very special. And one day I'm going to speak there. I'm going to figure out how to get a talk accepted there.
Even if it means we send them cookies or money or other various bribes.
I am not below bribery. Anyway, it's enough about all that. We have quite a bit of news and quite a cool topic tonight. So like, why don't you kick us off? What's in the news?
Well, the first thing that I got here, because you know how we've talked off and on about how things have been affecting the healthcare industry?
I do.
Well, there was a recent phishing attack that impacted 44,000 patient records for healthcare and their partners.
Okay.
And this came from the HIPAA journal. So I know we've talked a bit about the rise of ransomware and how it's been used and moving from extortion to blackmail with releasing information. But another trend that I've been noticing in the news article, and why we keep bringing this up, is how the healthcare industry has been targeted also, which this isn't just, oh no, it's another vertical. It's like, this is another vertical market that potentially affects human safety.
Yes, we're definitely talking about, I mean, it used to be that this stuff was off limits, right?
Right. That was like the unspoken rule, kind of like the engagement rules of war. Like, whatever you want, just don't mess with actual human safety.
Mm-hmm. Although I have another human safety one to talk about a little bit later, but what else is going on?
Now, you know how I kind of have a cat. I kind of like
never
my cat.
knew.
There kind of is a cat thing both in the industry and the internet. Well,
I didn't know that either.
There was this fantastic article that I showed me something that gave me very much hope for this week, that a company actually brought 2 cats in to the workspace to boost employee morale. And the names are fantastic. Credit and debit.
You know how I feel about this?
I don't.
Achoo.
Oh no, allergies. But look at the pictures. Look at how cute they are. Like
in the Staples boxes?
Yeah, in the Staples boxes. In the person's lap. Now, on a personal note, the company that I work for, they're about to move office spaces. And I was talking with the people that will also be in this office space. And I'm like, my cat sometimes deals with separation anxiety. So I just want to start bringing him into work. And they've been okay with it. So it made me happy to see that other businesses are allowing pets in the workspace now.
Achoo.
Now, I got one more thing to go before you got something exciting for us.
I don't know about exciting. Horrifying is more like it.
It's another leak. Something kind of horrifying too. Like there was a hacker that leaked, what was it? About 500,000 IoT and router usernames and passwords available on the public internet.
Yeah, Telnet credentials, right?
Telnet credentials, yes. And for the IoT stuff, like this may be some home automation stuff, but that now becomes like a list, a book that a lot of these, kind of going back to our Andrew Thompson talk, a lot of these people who have a lower skill set but using these tools can then just plug into and start figuring out how to compromise and add to their own botnet and things like that.
Well, IoT stuff becomes really interesting when you talk about botnets too, because like, you know, maybe you'd have one computer, but you might have like 50 smart light bulbs. So like if you can turn those smart light bulbs into part of your botnet, plus your Nest, plus all your other crap, like it becomes really effective in basically doubling down and making this huge botnet size that you don't get just from like one computer. Plus like the security stuff on the IoT stuff is usually lower.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what's the horrifying thing you got for us?
All right. So, and like we'll get into the why beforehand or afterward. So, report adult site leaks extremely sensitive data of porn actors and actresses. 19.95 gig of visible data. So we talk about this. The site is actually Pussy Cash, which I just really did want to say that on the podcast.
What was that again?
Pussy Cash. It's a cam affiliate network, so they own several brands, right? And they have about 4,000 actors. So let's talk about what leaked. Ready for this?
Tell me. I want to know more about Pussy Cash.
Full name, birth date, birthplace, citizenship status, nationality, passport and ID number, passport issue and expiration dates, nationally registered gender, ID photo, personal signature, parents' full names, fingerprints, and additional country-specific details like emergency contact information for UK citizens. So why is this horrifying when you get down to it? I mean, a data breach is a data breach, right? But not really in this use case.
That almost sounds like as much information that comes out of every time OPM gets breached.
Right? However, the danger kind of exists in the same way with almost some new stuff in that threat model. So like of all the people who have like serious OPSEC in the world, like InfoSec people are one of them. People in porn are more. Like the damage that can be done, like, because you have stalkers, you have people who are against what they do and find it to be immoral. Like, oh, now all of a sudden 4,000 people's addresses are online and their real names. Like people could die over this shit. Like it's that level of serious. And you know, I don't frankly like give a damn how anybody feels about porn. But like the fact of the matter is like, because of this, there could be some real people's lives in danger from stalkers or people who are very opposed to what they do. It will likely and quite likely destroy lives. And that is really bad.
Yeah, and it gets back to the whole physical safety thing, right? Like the one thing that we do here with detections, our individual job, and like the general focus of everyone in this community is to ensure that human lives stay safe.
Yeah, and I mean we protect data and stuff too, but like human life is always the big one.
Yep. And
this is particularly frightening. There's some other really frightening stuff going on too, though. Less frightening, I think, but still frightening. So a report came out from Politico that the Georgia election systems could have been hacked before the 2016 vote. One of their election servers contains evidence that it was possibly hacked before the presidential election and the 2018 vote. The incident actually occurred in 2014, long before those elections, and calls into question a lot of integrity. And it's not confirmed whether or not they were able to manipulate election data, but it does call that into question. And this is a big, big topic on like the use of fully digital election computers. Like that's a huge topic right now.
Well, and then it helps to feed in the statistics about like the average time that it takes to discover a breach, right? We're looking at, what was it, double-digit months? And so we're 2 years, and then it also feeds into that whole assumed breach model.
You're like 6 years on this, 2014 to 2020.
So it just adds evidence to this whole like working from this assumed breach model when you get things going inside your organization.
But the problem is Georgia's already getting scrutinized because they're one of the only people who use paperless voting machines. And like there are videos, and I showed one of these to my wife, of somebody showing like how in less than a minute you can hack a voting machine just by clicking a few buttons. And she was like, "Oh my God, that's real?" I'm like, "Yeah, that happens." It's a thing. Speaking of really weird voter stuff, and this is kind of in your ballpark.
Well, are you saying my ballpark in my state or my general area of the country?
Your general area in the country. It's your state too, right?
Oh no, it is not my state.
Okay, well you're close enough.
It is my state's rival.
You're close
aside
enough.
from California.
Yeah, you're still close though. Seattle area voters are going to be able to vote by smartphone in the as a first for U.S. elections. It's just a district right now, so it's literally just a district. But like,
Does
how
it happen
fucking
to be the
horrifying can
district
that
that
be?
holds Amazon headquarters?
I don't know. It encompasses all of Greater Seattle, and they're only doing it for like local elections right now. So there will be about 1.2 million people who can take part in this, and they're doing it. And I understand, like, voter turnout is way the hell down, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when we have all these questions and unsureties about the quality and safety of elections, especially as we move into digital, like, how frightening is it that, like, smartphones, like, man, if we go that route, are you going to see some custom fucking malware made for smartphones that will manipulate that shit?
Or, I mean, like, I made the Amazon comment kind of in a conspiracy theorist kind of joke, but I just looked at it. It is an Amazon headquarters. And if you think about, like, what's on a smartphone, who controls access to it, Facebook, Google, and Amazon are going to most likely have access to the quote-unquote anonymized data that's passing through voting off a smartphone.
It's quite possible, actually, or internet service providers and other things like that.
Right.
So, like, that's historic and interesting. I'm not going to say that I don't really have a stance on whether or not I agree with it. Like, if you get more people to vote, that's good. But, like, what I want to know is in detail how they plan on securing that method of voting. Because at that point, like, there's really no user verification. Like, if nobody's got to show up, your user verification goes way down.
And if they do something like just incremental, like predictable incremental aspects when it comes to vote, someone could just write a bot in a weekend to control it however they wanted.
Yep. So, those are my horrifying developments. Back to you.
Well,
We should have saved the cat thing to
for the end. Being like, hey, guess what? It's all nice and pretty.
That's you. Sorry.
Now, this isn't so much horrifying as just concerning in the way that this goes about. I found, actually, I think it was Swift on Security on Twitter that originally turned this on to me, that there's an update coming to Office 365. What was it? Professional. One of the specific subscription services that by default, they're going to turn the Google Chrome browser's default search engine to Bing. And the only way you can change it is if you preliminarily put in some GPO settings or do it after the fact.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not like that's uncommon, like, when you own the browser. That gets really interesting when you're starting to, like, change other browsers.
Exactly. Bing in Chrome. And it says it's only in specific countries, but if you look at the specific countries, it's Germany, UK, US, India, France, Canada, and Australia.
Probably because they're not allowed to do it here.
Well, the US is the last one on the list.
Oh.
So, I mean, that's how much of the percentage of the internet users in the world?
Right? It also it brings up a really interesting concept. So Katie Moseris, I definitely pronounced that name wrong.
We're sorry.
We are. I read a really long post from her about, like, she was the person who developed Microsoft's public bug bounty program. And she was talking about, like, all the things that drive bug bounty programs, right? And she was like, well, for Microsoft, what really drove the bug bounty program was Google Chrome. Like, as soon as Google Chrome had a bug bounty program, like, that was public and actually paid out people and started to publicize that, and, like, the second that they overtook Explorer in users was when Microsoft was like, okay, we're getting serious. We're doing this. Like, it influences business decisions in really interesting ways. Not entirely related, but also kind of interesting. Especially as you talk about, like, business strategy. Like, this is a business strategy for them, right? They're basically screwing with somebody else's browser to navigate people to their search engine. What else you got?
So the next thing that I put on the list here is actually left over from training that I went to this last weekend. I don't know if people were aware of it, but Black Hills Information Security and Active Countermeasures, the like defense focused version of Black Hills. John Strand's the co-founder of that one.
So first off, how was that hunt training?
Oh, it was fantastic. Like, it was well done, and it's a training that I would put into the. You're currently a SOC analyst looking for more experience and to get into threat hunting.
I actually have several of my guys who signed up for the April one.
Perfect. I'm glad they did. They'll get a lot out of it. But there were some concepts in there and some things that they covered that were a bit much for people who weren't necessarily involved in a SOC or incident response beforehand, right? So there were some base level knowledge assumptions. Like, it was still pretty introductory on a lot of the stuff, but it wasn't like I'm a high school student introductory, if that makes any sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. I got you.
So if you're running a SOC, you're a SOC analyst, you're somewhere in like this new-ish to maybe a year or two in, this is perfect, right? So the focus of it was mainly C2 threat hunting, using some of the tools. But from that training, there was a tool that I wasn't aware of that Bill, the guy who put on the training, had developed and produced, was this tool called Passer that uses Python to work as a sniffer to identify servers, clients, names, and things like that as kind of like an internal recon of what's working inside your network.
So I have one question. Do we really have to say uses Python anymore? Because everything uses Python.
Well, as people will hear next week, there are tools being written in Go. And I've seen a huge increase in things that are being written in Go.
Dude, don't get timey-wimey on me.
Now, since we brought up Go, I think the reason why some people go with Go is because you can script and compile within Go without having to switch languages.
Go. Like, it makes you
go.
ready.
Go faster.
Ready to go.
You can sit inside of a car with a cougar and learn how to go faster.
Dude, I don't know if they have a tagline, but it should be "I'm ready to go."
But yeah, so that training, like, so I think it was by the end there was close or over 6,000 people that signed up for it. 2,600 people actually attended. And in Dead Pixel Sec, we had, I think it was around 10 to 12 people that were in the training at the same time, and we managed an internal conversation. And yeah, it was fantastic. If you can sign up, I highly recommend you sign up for it. And I think they're going to break it down into smaller chunks and like make it reproducible. And it is, I don't know, it's something that you would probably pay $400 or $500 for at a conference to get this kind of training that they just provided for free.
So, should we talk about privacy for a minute?
I mean,
privacy
is kind
really
of a big thing for us always.
It is. So, New York Times put out an article about a company that might end privacy as we know it. And it sounds a little extreme, but it's really interesting. There's a company called Clearview AI, small little company. They basically built a facial recognition app. You take a picture of a person, upload it, you can see any public pictures of that person. They basically go through and scrape Facebook, YouTube, Venmo, and a whole bunch of other websites looking for people. To such an extent, like they sell this as a service, right? So like federal and state law enforcement officers use it. They don't know how it works on the back end. They don't know who's behind it entirely, but like they do use it for cases. It doesn't necessarily say how many other people, like how to buy it. Like, could I just go buy access and like search for people and make that scary? Here's where shit gets really interesting because like there's, no public scrutiny around it. The reporter who was looking into it was not answering this guy, right? The guy who was looking into it. However, they were monitoring him. So at his request, a number of police officers ran his photo through the app. They soon received phone calls from company representatives asking if they were talking to the media. So like they were literally watching and saw, oh, reporter, hey cops, are you talking to the media? That's fucking horrifying.
That is pretty horrifying.
Like in general, and then they did start to talk to him. It's a really interesting article though, and we'll post it with everything else that we post. But on the same kind of line of thought, Facebook has had this facial recognition case for a little while. Basically, they started doing facial recognition and saying like, "Would you like to tag this person?" They didn't really tell anybody. Like, it wasn't an opt out. Like, you were in, and then you could go opt out, but it would basically like fingerprint you on Facebook. The Supreme Court has declined to take the case, which is interesting. What? Yeah, they said that they're rejecting. So Facebook wanted them to review it because the lower cases basically said they have to pay out multi-billion dollars in a class action in Illinois because they think it violated Illinois' privacy law. The Supreme Court's like, yeah, we're not going to look at that. It gets really interesting because the concept of privacy and breach is changing. Like, it used to be like a breach, like the plaintiff had to prove harm. Mm-hmm. When you look at like CCPA and GDPR and some of these things, like you're starting to move to a more implied harm model for privacy, which is probably better for everybody involved, but much more difficult for companies to adjust to.
Wait, did you just say implied harm?
Yeah, if it's available, the harm is implied. You don't have to prove it anymore. It used to be that you have to prove that harm was done, right? You couldn't imply like, oh, so if a company had a data breach, until a person could prove that their information was used, there was no harm. They could not prove harm. We're starting to move to data breach and privacy issues where the harm is implied. Just by the mere fact that it's out there, the harm is done. Mm-hmm. So implied harm, does the word work?
Oh, I think it definitely works. I just wanted a clarification that those were the words that were used.
Fair. And I don't not legally, that's just my verbiage.
Yeah.
I didn't read that word for word or anything. But I expect that we're going to see a lot more of this kind of stuff coming up, especially as companies like the New York Times start to dig into some of these lesser known companies so deeply. Because I'm pretty sure it was them who did the location tracking article too that we talked about. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of eyes on this right now, and it's going to be really interesting because, the more I talk about this topic, the more I realize how much can you blame people for signing up for a service when they don't fully understand the risks? Because the risks aren't actually presented to them, right? Most people don't know about this stuff. I had no idea about this Clearview company that was potentially going through and scanning everything that I have on every service without my permission. And then using it to do facial recognition to find me. I didn't know that existed. I do now. But anyway, that's enough on privacy. We'll get to that later, but we have so much other stuff to talk about. So basically the next one kind of leads us into the topic. So why don't you take it away?
Yeah. So I found this really interesting Twitter post from Chris Sanders, puts out some fantastic training. Think if I remember right, he's involved with a pretty cool nonprofit also.
You're right.
Yeah.
It's called the Rural Tech Fund, and it's awesome.
Rural Tech Fund. I did that because I can't offer enough signal to this place. We'll go into more later, but look up Rural Tech Fund. But he put up this 10 post long Twitter stream that starts off about what distinguishes good analysts and how it boils down to doing the work versus avoiding familiar data bias. I bring this up because he provides some fantastic insight into things that we've both discussed on and offline that we completely agree with. And it brings us, like you said, into our topic of the SOC itself.
It does very much bring us into the topic on the SOC. And we're going to break out SOC stuff into multiple topics because it's realistically kind of our sweet spot. I love building security programs. Mm-hmm. I like doing that kind of stuff. It's really where we live. Tonight, we're going to talk about this concept of a tiered SOC versus a non-tiered SOC. So really, you're the one who went out and did the work to find the definition. So what is a tiered SOC?
So I wanted to do the work to bring up the definition because I wanted to make sure that what we were talking about, people understand that, because as I was physically talking to people, sometimes their understanding of what they thought a tiered SOC was doesn't match with how I've read in Mandiant reports or articles from various vendors. So I found one from Palo Alto that kind of defined it, that a tier one, so in a tiered SOC, you have effectively tier one through tier three, where tier one analysts are your triage analysts, and they don't really get a chance to investigate. All they do is look at events that are coming in the tools, and if they think it needs more information, further digging, they are forced to escalate it up to a tier two. And then if the tier two analyst can't handle that, or they're not quite sure, then it gets escalated up. And if this article breaks it down into triage, investigation, threat hunting, where the tier three then becomes the person who's actively investigating the network. And it has these defined roles, so each tier is limited to only a specific job set that they're doing.
Yeah. So that's what what has been called a traditional model, right?
Yes.
Relatively traditional SOC model. You bring in your junior touches X, he does not touch anything past that. Then your mid-level guy is the escalation point, he touches Y, and then your senior guy touches Z, right?
Yeah.
That has some benefits and it has some negatives. I think it has far more negatives. So let's talk about the benefits first.
I think it has far more negatives too. So tell me about the benefits.
So there is a benefit. Protection. Limited access to data and limited access to ability means that a junior person cannot functionally destroy a company or system, which is something that can happen in other models. It is worth mentioning that, and I'm only doing it in the interest of fairness, not because I in any way, shape, or form believe that this is the right thing to do in a SOC, because I don't. But in the interest of fairness, it's worth mentioning that you limit your risk a little bit that way, right? But you lose a lot more, like a lot more. You lose, oh, Jesus. I'm trying to figure out, do I just want to do a long list? I don't think so. So things that we lose, and then I guess we can talk about it. So thing number one, you lose analysis quality. One of the things that I find really interesting is the guy who's looking at the alerts is arguably probably one of the most important functions in a business, right? He's the first line of defense. He's the guy or girl finding stuff.
Which ultimately comes down to that is the single person that decides if something's an incident or not.
Correct. So if that person goes, meh, I don't think that's anything because I'm not sure. Like, there's real damage there. And that's not damage that's often accounted for, but there's real and serious damage there.
Now, I wanna interrupt you real quick because I have a real world example to explain this.
Okay, let's hear it.
So there was the first SOC I was working in. We hired this guy, brought him in, and he was literally closing out tickets as a false positive because he quote unquote couldn't read the payload, and it was simply base 64 encoded. And once you decoded the payload of the packet, it was China Chopper trying to do a self-propagation.
So I have seen that before. I have seen people close stuff out as false positive with the answer of, I don't understand this, or there's not enough information for me to make a decision. Like, that shit happens. So like when we talk about risk, right? And when we talk about that kind of risk, like there's a serious risk to only letting your junior people in that feed. From a security perspective, because they're not necessarily going to be able to make the same decisions. So risk number two, not risk number two, but downside number two. What about growth?
I was just going to say, I hope it's growth because that is the most important one to me is the growth.
It is. So I have the unique problem or the unique position where like I have to subsequently walk the line between what's best for the business and what's best for my team. Like that's hashtag manager life, right? So like not every decision I make is in my team's best interest because I also have to have the company's best interest in my mind. So like, it's good to know. That's my job. I usually try to find some compromise, but talk about growth and then talk about like how that's in the company's best interest. So if I don't let the junior analyst do anything else other than click that button, is that junior analyst ever going to get any better? Am I ever going to get an investment in that person where they get better?
Hell no. And they're probably going to be gone in less than 2 years.
Probably. And they're going to go somewhere else and they're going to go, this place is going to be different. And then it's not. until they come work for me, which it is different, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, like the lack of growth thing is a serious problem. Like if you don't let your analysts interact, if you don't let them kind of do the work and do the investigation, not only are you going to get piss poor, shitty investigations, but you're also going to get analysts who don't actually grow. Like you will stifle the curiosity of the interested person, which will functionally make them significantly worse at their job. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah, I think so. But it doesn't just doesn't stifle their curiosity. It stifles their passion, right?
Correct.
Like I've seen this. Like they start to lose hope that they will be good at their job and start to look for ways to get out of it.
Or that they'll ever like fully understand their job.
Yes.
Which is another big part of it. So, and we'll give a shout out, and this is ultimately, your shout out. Damn it, why do I forget his name now? Who's the guy who did the presentation that was really good?
Oh, the John Hubbard, right?
John Hubbard, that's
yes.
it. So he's got
his presentation called Virtuous Cycles.
Yep, and we will link to it. He has got a brilliant slide about how Reddit describes a SOC. And it's like drowning in tickets. 95% of our rules are based on intel. If there's suspicious traffic, we don't do anything about it because the IP is clean. The worst thing is almost, and I mean like over 95% are false positives. Even those are escalated. As tier 1, we don't have enough access to check what's really going on.
And I love this one. So true. You were scanned by an IP that was a C2 about 10 years ago. And this indicates that there's an active compromise machine on your network.
I actually think you added maybe 2 extra O's at the end of that. It's only about so true. Anyway, I can never resist an opportunity for a bad joke. It's the dad in me.
Dad.
So the comment about like, there's some comments in there about like, we don't have enough access to check what's really going on. So like, let's talk a scenario, right? Like this will be fun. Let's talk about a scenario. So like phishing email gets submitted or you get some trigger that says it's a phishing email. And I like to use phishing emails because phishing emails are how all breaches happen.
Yeah. Well, it's like greater than 80, less than 100%.
Pretty much. So I love using that as an example because of how important it is. So phishing email comes in, you click a button, you can go, okay, virus total tells me that link is okay. I'm moving on. Well, that's your first step of tier 1. Maybe your second step of tier 1 is, well, that looks like credential harvesting. It's not on virus total, but like, I can tell. I put it in URL scan or whatever. And even that's past a lot of tier 1. But even then, okay, that's bad. Escalate. So like, what about all the other stuff that has to take place? What about scoping it? What about seeing who received the email? What about seeing who clicked? What about seeing what comes after credentials get entered? We talked about this a lot in our link analysis episode. Like, those are all things that are, in my opinion, base level triage. Mm-hmm. And those are all things that are often kind of like, oh no, well, like we can't let people click stuff. Like if we let them click stuff, they'll break it. So you get no growth and you get a bigger risk to the company because full analysis is not being done. And that's, I think, the kind of essence of Sanders' post too.
Yes. He does provide some other stuff too. Now, as a contrast, or not necessarily contrast, but as another model, there are organizations like yourself and like what I try to implement when I work as a consultant for places is this tierless model, right? Where it doesn't matter where they're brought in as, like even if an organization has a tier 1 through tier 3 for payroll, for
Let me be clear, we do have that, but I'll talk about my model in a minute.
But functionally you run more as a tier list rather than as a tier, right? Like you don't let your individual people get stifled like once they reach a certain point unless they reach out for it.
That's correct.
Right.
With one caveat. My tiers don't mean role. My tiers mean expectation. So I don't expect my tier 1 to, go do hunting really well or like go find new ways to find badness. I encourage them to do it. I assign it to them and let them experiment and let them grow and let them learn that process.
Yeah.
But I don't expect them to have the same level of output as my tier 2 and tier 3s. So I do expectation based tiers rather than job role based tiers.
and that's kind of where the line delineates between the tiered versus the tierless is in the tiered model. That tier one would have a hard stop at the investigation, where even though you have an expectancy of output, they're not limited to that, right? So if there's a so the tierless model has we hire analysts at whatever tier or however it's broken down for an organization, and the individual is allowed to pursue it as much as within their knowledge and expertise, and
And
there are
even
processes
outside
in
of their
places
comfort
for
zone. Because
yeah,
that's important. Like pushing outside of that comfort zone is something that I encourage all my analysts to do.
that's how we grow, right? We don't grow unless we get outside our comfort zone.
Mm-hmm. And it's amazing, like once you push somebody outside that zone, how much value they have, like that they can provide that says like, oh man, I just thought of this thing. And like, fuck, I've been doing this a long time. I didn't think of that thing.
And that's the value, and that is the huge benefit that you can get from a tierless model, right? Now, some of the downsides we can think about a tierless model is you don't have those delineated lines, right? Like who knows the scope of their job? Some people can get overburdened with what they think they should be doing and don't necessarily reach out for escalation. And typically, tierless models also tend to be smaller teams.
I have an answer for that, by the way.
Go.
So we have a rule, and I've had this rule across many places, and this works pretty good. My rule is if you're stuck on an individual component of an investigation, and I don't mean like the investigation as a whole. I mean, if you're stuck on an individual component, like I can't find out how this connects to this, like that specific, that level of specificity, right? 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, if you're stuck on a singular point, I expect you to ask for help. Ask the team, escalate up, doesn't matter. But my general rule is if you're stuck for 15 minutes on one thing, that's when you escalate up.
Yeah, and that's about the general, like, quote-unquote rule of thumb that I use for anything, too, when I teach people is 15 to 20 minutes before you make a ticket, before you escalate, before you reach out to a peer for help, before you start reaching out, right? Like, just as kind of a guideline.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing the level of interest that comes when you give somebody that ability, though, right? So, like, you can almost call it a grand experiment. In some senses, I call what I do now a grand experiment. But it gets really interesting because, like, I'll have analysts who are, like, looking into something and then they'll be like, oh, shit, like, this thing, like, it's not, like, breach problem, but, like, it's a real security flaw for our company as a whole. I'm going to dig down into this and I'm going to figure out about it and I'm going to spin up a VM and I'm going to test it. I'm going to do all this stuff. And this is like tier one guys, by the way. They're like, I'm going to do all this stuff and then I'm going to present my boss with information, be like, hey, I'd like to get this like removed from the network from everybody. Like when you give people that leash, or more importantly, I think the key word here is trust. When you give people trust, they will do one of two things. They will either excel, and that is awesome, or they will not, and they will abuse that trust. And my general theory, as cold as it sounds, is I don't keep people that I don't trust employed.
Yeah, absolutely, because if they prove to be not trustworthy, then that's discovered quickly in that kind of environment, and you can, bring in someone that can build that trust to get what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. And I genuinely start at a level of trust with everybody until you break it. But like, because trust works both ways, and you should start with a level of trust. But like, we so often in the current SOC, and I've been shopping around to talk about this very topic, and the tier to tierless model actually fits this. We take what is functionally one of the most important roles in a security team and for the security of a company, protecting from outside and inside attackers. And we modulate it down to click a button, no thought concept, because we don't trust the people who are doing it enough to either know or to be able to learn and look stuff up. So we gate them off from everything that's important and everything that can move them forward. And we are functionally destroying not only the job and how people view the job, but like we are also functionally destroying like our ability to have good security.
To be defense, yeah.
Yeah.
And those people are, in my experience, the highest percentage of intelligent and passionate people inside this industry.
Mm-hmm. Like, it's all about giving people a little bit of room and a little bit of trust and actually treating them like their job is important.
Or
like,
a
that's
human.
the other part.
Treat them like a human.
Treating them like a human helps too. But like, I feel like we've moved to a point where we're like, oh, that's an entry level job, so it's not really important. And that's couldn't be farther from the truth. Like, that's the thing. Yeah, I hire entry level people, but it doesn't make the job not important. The job is incredibly important.
Absolutely. Like, as a visual, like, historical representation in my head, I think more of it along the lines of the soldiers who are literally in the trenches in World War One.
Yeah. And I mean, that job is incredibly important, right? Like, I did a keynote once upon a time for a conference, and one of the slides was, it was called Between a Sock and a Hard Place. And one of the slides was talking about swim lanes, like, and it was basically like this dude, and it was kind of animated. So like this dude's like trying to go over here and learn something, and trying to go over here and learn something, and just two walls drop down. It's like, stay in your swim lane, Jimmy. And I just hate the concept of swim lanes. Like, they're so restrictive. Like, yes, you have a job, but that does not mean that you cannot express interest or learn about how other stuff works. Like, the concept of like, you can't touch this. I'll tell a story about when I was in a SOC that I quit for an undisclosed government agency. I really wanted to do malware analysis, and I'm not a great malware analyst at this point. Like, I teach it on an introductory level, right? So I never like became like full on RE guy, but all I wanted to do was malware analysis. And like, one of the malware guys was like, let me teach you. And I'd be like, awesome. And then I'd go like, hey, this thing came on. Like, can I analyze this? People would be like, no, you're not tier 3. Only tier 3 people are allowed to analyze malware. You're not allowed to do that. I was like, okay, I quit. And I went somewhere where I could do it. Like, and I don't blame anybody else for doing the same thing. I hate swim lanes.
The only time they're acceptable is when you're at a gym swimming in your swim lane.
And even then, like, if you want to cut into the other person's lane, like, you do you, man. But I cannot say that there won't be consequences to your action. Yeah. Every action has a consequence.
In my head, the reaction to the consequence goes back to that great 90s film, Breaking Point, with Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze and Red Hot Chili Peppers, when somebody surfs the wrong wave and gets their ass beat.
Ah, deep cut. To quote Kevin Smith.
So I think that gives a pretty good touch into the tiered versus non-tiered SOC model.
I think it does. One thing that's worth kind of mentioning, like, if you exist in a tiered space, like, it's okay to push to try to move beyond that. If that's not viable for you, it's also okay to look for another job. Like, just know that, like, not everywhere works like that. And I think in the last couple of years, I've seen a lot more people moving to a non-tiered model and moving toward a higher trust model, which is really heartening to me that, like, we're starting to see a shift.
Absolutely. It's going to take a bit in that shift, because there are still big, quote unquote, nameless companies out there that produce these reports that show the tiered model at it. But having been both in a tiered and non-tiered space, definitely, I personally prefer the non-tiered space because it allows the potential for room to grow.
Oh, dude, my model is way more than just non-tiered and event analysis. We do weekly hunts, quote, hunt, unquote, since it's not the technical definition of hunt. I'll say weekly, like, low fidelity review. Mm-hmm. Then we also do monthly rotations for, like, tuning, research, documentation, which I know everybody loves. But, like, basically one of my monthly rotations is you're going to go out and you're going to read stuff and you're going to figure out how to apply that to find evil here. Like, something I have all my people do. Like, I think it's valuable. Like, we really harp on this, like, concept of, like, yeah, you look at alerts, but you're also going to do all this other stuff that's going to both better the company security posture as a whole and help you grow. I'll go way more into depth in this if people are interested in later episodes.
I was just going to give you a shameless plug and say, which means if you're looking, definitely pay attention to what's happening with the Paranoids group and look for open positions.
You can, but, like, not even that. Just, like, I'm more than willing to talk about the model for, like, the model that I've built to do this. If people are interested, like, I'd love to talk about, like, functionally building a SOC that allows people to do what I think is cool shit.
Maybe we should put this as, like, a you and I doing a back and forth conference talk on SOC.
Maybe I'd do that.
Before we
Anyway,
go,
the detection.
Yeah, the detection, right? So
This is going to take detections without the detection.
Exactly. We can't have that. Like that's our shtick. That's our thing.
We would open up like a time vortex, and like it would just be bad. And the Weeping Angels would come, and I'm just trying to throw in as many Doctor Who references as
I was just going to say, Weeping Angels is a Doctor Who reference, right?
I know. I've made like 7 Doctor Who references throughout this show.
Yeah, and I've caught 2 because I've never seen the show.
Oh, you're missing out, man.
We will talk about it outside of the
We will. Episode. Anyway, the detection. Take it away.
So it's kind of an extension of this threat hunting class that Black Hills put on. Before I'm pretty sure we've talked about beaconing before, but this whole activity of C2 once you have malware established on a network, right? So our detection for this week is actually pay attention to the session size of open connections, right? So if we think about normal activity from a user inside of an organization network to an external web server, if we think about the server-client relationship, clients coming from inside your network to a server externally, most often that traffic is quick bursts of activity. So the client will make the request, they'll download a bunch of stuff, the session will only maintain long enough to download the resources, whether it's idle or not, and browser plugins or whatever, right? There'll be like bursts of activity. Now, if you look at session size, either through like NetFlow data, using Zeek, or any number of tools that are available to correlate the mathematics behind a session size, if you look at large session size, that means it's been a long-term, persistent connection to a remote web server. Now, does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know how many places have a thing like that in place, but it is a definite thing because it isn't necessarily malicious, but it is very anomalous from normal user behavior.
Well, like with all things, normalization becomes key, right? And that tuning piece. So like going through that whole concept and making decisions of like, oh, like let me do this and then let me like systematically go through every single connection that I see and be like, okay, this is normal. This is that tool that nobody else in the world uses that I have. This is this is that. Like that'll basically just let you set your environment up so that when you do see something, it is pretty anomalous.
And that goes back to the basic SOC stuff, right? Like once you establish a SOC, it's spun up doing baselining to help understand this stuff. But this is a definite thing. Like, and if you look at best size, session size again, like if you watch the actual numbers and if it's counted in seconds, most of them will be like triple digits at best. So if you look at session sizes that are like 5 to double digits of session sizes, you're going to find extremely anomalous and outlier activity.
Yep. So does that about cover it?
I think so. I mean, I feel like we covered a lot of material in the time already.
I think so. So to everybody in the future, we hope you enjoyed this show. To everybody in the past, I mean, you won't hear this because you're in the past. So on that note, have a good night, everybody. Go forth and find badness.